2, and 1. Thank you. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different tables, and I'm just wondering if there are any share outs you'd like to take just from a what do you want to add from yourself, or what you heard from your table, or those that you spoke with about sort of purpose of being here in the room together, just to get a flavor.
Well, I think with the 2 others that I spoke with, the theme was that we share a frustration that white faculty are often really unaware of the kind of implicit bias and racism they're bringing to the classroom, and that we're looking for real productive ways to address that with ourselves maybe, and also with our peers.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. Anybody from this side of the room?
I'll just share very briefly. Ann and I were discussing the power in your title. So two of the phrases that stuck out are white teacher and anti-racist. So they both really get to the heart of why we're here.
Great. Finally got a title that works. Horrible at titles, yes. Anybody else? No pressure. Okay, so onward and moving forward then. I want to share a little bit more in terms of resources, right? And this is a little bit more of an introduction about me, but also where this work today is situated within the variety of resources that I have worked with. So when I began presenting and working in racial identity work, the primary resource tool that I ended up creating is a book called Witnessing Whiteness. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with it. I have a number of copies here if you end up being interested in it. But this is essentially the journey from my grade school teaching as a white teacher who did not know anything about race issues. I had been really raised within a colorblind setting and came to understand through a lot of work by people around me, helping me to get through my defensiveness and start to pay attention to these things. The book itself is more of a loving gesture to those who are coming after me to say, you know, you don't have to do it the way I did it. There are ways that we can learn from other people who are farther along. And so the whole middle section is interview material from white people and people of color who have been doing this work for a long time and naming their challenges, frustrations, what they understand about these issues, and just sort of what is whiteness, what happens, especially to white people when we find out we're white. Because there's a thing, right? There's a whole psychological thing we go through, and that's sort of where we're going to head a little bit later in today's session. But how did this happen? And then what do we do about it? And so this has been used with a downloadable and free, FYI, so resources, free curriculum online that you can download and use as a companion. So this came out a long time ago. So there are people who have been utilizing this with faculty or community organizations, church organizations. It's not specific to educators. It's not even only specific to white people, although typically white people are the ones who primarily do it, and that's all fine. Anyway, that's its own thing, and that's where things really began. And I have continued to pay attention to issues of racial identity development ever since. The newest thing for tomorrow morning is, now that I've been paying a lot of attention to that, I'm starting to see the fissures and the cracks. And so there's another thing that's going on, living in the tension, a quest for spiritualized racial justice. And so if that's intriguing to you, that's kind of a tomorrow morning conversation. In between those is what we're going to do today. So that's all to say that for about the last 10 to 15 years, I've been really trying to figure out my teaching practice. I'm working with other colleagues on our teaching practice. And what we've essentially discovered is that there's a lot of distance to cover between first understanding, oh, there's a race thing, and how to really, really have a solid practice that's legitimately anti-racist. So that's what we're going to pay attention to today, is that middle space. So in doing so, what this session is based upon is an article that was inspired by my co-author, Jamie Utt, who approached me and said, let's do some writing together. And so this title is actually a title of a lengthy article that can be downloaded via Sage. If you do not have access to Sage Publishing, or Urban Ed is what it's in right now, it just came out like a week ago, so we're very pleased. This sign-up sheet is going to go around. I can email you. I decided not to use PowerPoint because you just never know if it's going to be available at a conference. So the packets that are on your desk are for you to take. If you would like either this as a handout in electronic form or the article itself, please put your name and email on here and I will get it to you. I'll start over here and then we'll make sure it gets around the room over the course of our time together. Let me just stop for a second and say, do you have any questions about anything I've said so far or comments before we launch into the meat of today?
What's the title of your article?
The title of the article is right here at the top of this. It's called White Teacher Know Thyself, Improving Anti-Racist Practice Through Racial Identity Development. And on the front page of this handout is the abstract. That's the official abstract for the article. And what we're going to do is not go in order of these pages. This just made for a better front page, so I do that. What I'd actually like to start with, and just to give you a basic flow and agenda for the morning, what I'm looking to do is spend a bit of time doing an overview of white racial identity development, just to give a framework, because not everybody may be familiar with that. And then to go through some of the elements of what's being offered in this article in dialogue with that. And then to provide time here for collaborative conversation around what kind of opportunities do you have you experienced, might be possible at your campuses to help support teachers within the areas of work we'll be discussing, and then we'll have some time for group discussion and share. So that's the overall idea for our time together. So that said, we'll launch into page 2. So if you just flip, and everybody should have something at the table they can look at. So out of curiosity, white racial identity development, how many of you are familiar with the work of Janet Helms? Okay, that is a small number of people in the room in comparison to the rest of you. So I'm just gonna take a breath and try and be a little bit slow in going through this page, just as a general overview. And I invite you to consider reflecting on this as we go through it from either one or another vantage point. If you're a white teacher, educator, think about this through your own lens of at what point have you moved through or experienced some of these statuses? Where do you find yourself presently? And what's that been like? If you self-identify as a person of color, in what ways have you experienced colleagues moving through or